Part 1. We look up. We've always looked up. The moon, a celestial companion, a silent witness to the unfolding drama of life on Earth. Its rhythmic dance with our planet, dictating tides and illuminating our nights, has woven itself into the fabric of our myths and our science. But what if the familiar face of the moon hides a secret, a truth more profound and startling than we ever imagined? What if the moon's craters, those pockmarked scars across its surface, are not just the remnants of cosmic collisions, but evidence of something else entirely? Evidence of extraterrestrial industry, of an ancient mining operation on a scale that dwarfs our own terrestrial endeavors. The conventional wisdom, the narrative we've been taught, tells us these craters are the result of asteroid and comet impacts over billions of years. A cosmic bombardment that sculpted the lunar landscape into the familiar image we see today. And indeed, impact cratering is a well-established geological process, readily observable throughout our solar system. We see it on Mercury, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The evidence, it would seem, is irrefutable. But what if we've misinterpreted the evidence? What if we've looked at the moon through the lens of our own limited understanding and missed a more complex, more extraordinary reality? Consider the sheer number of craters on the moon, their varying sizes and distributions. While impact events certainly occur, the density of craters, particularly on the far side of the moon, raises intriguing questions. Some researchers have suggested that the distribution doesn't entirely align with the expected patterns of random asteroid impacts. Certain regions appear disproportionately cratered, while others remain relatively smooth. Could this irregularity be a clue, a subtle hint pointing towards a different explanation? Let's examine the craters themselves. While many conform to the expected morphology of impact craters, others exhibit peculiar characteristics that defy easy explanation. Some craters are unusually shallow for their diameter, lacking the central uplift or the terraced walls typically associated with impact events. Others are almost perfectly circular, a rarity in natural impact craters which are often elliptical due to the angle of impact. These anomalies, while often dismissed as statistical outliers, deserve closer scrutiny. Could these be the telltale signs of artificial excavation, the fingerprints of a technology far beyond our current comprehension? The composition of the lunar regolith, the layer of dust and rock covering the moon's surface, also presents some intriguing puzzles. While analysis of lunar samples brought back by the Apollo missions has confirmed the presence of materials commonly associated with impact events, there are also some unexpected findings. Certain isotopes and mineral concentrations appear in ratios that don't quite fit the standard impact model. Could these variations be the remnants of a large-scale mining operation, the byproducts of an alien industry extracting valuable resources from the lunar crust? Imagine a civilization, vastly older and more advanced than our own, with a need for rare elements or minerals found in abundance on the moon. Perhaps they utilized technologies that leave minimal surface disruption, technologies that could excavate vast quantities of material with surgical precision. Their methods might have been so sophisticated, so seamlessly integrated with the lunar environment, that we've mistaken their handiwork for the natural processes of cosmic erosion. This isn't about little green men or flying saucers. This is about a re-evaluation of the evidence, a willingness to consider alternative explanations for the mysteries that surround us. It's about acknowledging the limits of our current understanding and embracing the possibility that the universe holds secrets far more wondrous and complex than we can currently imagine. The moon, our closest celestial neighbor, might just be holding one of those secrets, waiting to be uncovered. And perhaps, just perhaps, the key to unlocking that secret lies in the very craters we've so long taken for granted. The possibility, however remote, deserves our attention. The implications, should it prove true, are nothing short of revolutionary. The silence that followed Dr. Aris's revelation was heavier than the lunar dust clinging to Armstrong's boots. The grainy black and white image of the crater, Tycho, filled the screen, its stark beauty now a chilling testament to something unknown, something potentially hostile. Outside, the Nevada desert wind howled, a lonely echo of the cosmic dread that had settled in the room. Mining. General Maddox finally broke the silence, his voice raspy, on a planetary scale. But why? That's the million-dollar question, General, Aris replied, his fingers steepled in front of his face, his eyes glued to the screen. What could they possibly be extracting from the moon? And where are they now? The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. The information was classified at the highest level, a veil of secrecy drawn tight around the unsettling discovery. A dedicated team of astrophysicists, geologists, and even linguists were assembled at the remote Nevada base. Every lunar mission, from the earliest probes to Apollo 17, was re-examined. Every photograph, every rock sample, every radio transmission was scrutinized for clues. The more they dug, the more uneasy they became. Anomalies began to surface. Minor discrepancies in lunar orbit calculations, unexplained fluctuations in the moon's gravitational field, faint, almost imperceptible signals picked up by radio telescopes, all dismissed as noise or equipment malfunction at the time, now took on a sinister significance. Then came the analysis of the lunar rock samples. Dr. Anya Sharma, a geochemist with a reputation for meticulousness, discovered trace amounts of an unknown element, one that didn't exist on Earth's periodic table. It was interwoven within the lunar regolith, almost as if it was a byproduct, a residue of the hypothetical mining operation. It's like nothing I've ever seen," Sharma stammered during a late-night briefing, her face pale with exhaustion and a growing sense of unease. "Its atomic structure is alien. It defies our understanding of physics." The implications were staggering. The unknown element, dubbed lunarium, for lack of a better term, pointed to a technology far beyond human comprehension. A technology capable of reshaping the very surface of a celestial body. The linguists, meanwhile, were focusing on the strange signals intercepted by the radio telescopes. They were faint, intermittent, and buried deep within the cosmic background radiation, but they were there. Dr. Chen, the lead linguist, described them as complex, structured, and unlike any known terrestrial or even hypothesized extraterrestrial communication. "It's not language as we understand it," Chen explained, his voice barely above a whisper, eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and fear. "It's more like a mathematical equation. A complex series of prime numbers and geometric patterns." He paused, then added, his voice trembling, "It's as if they're calculating something. Something vast, something incomprehensible." The creeping dread in the room intensified. The moon, Earth's silent companion for billions of years, was suddenly a source of profound unease. It wasn't just an inert rock hanging in the sky. It was a scarred, hollowed-out husk, a monument to an incomprehensible alien industry, and potentially, a silent warning. One evening, while reviewing lunar seismographic data from the Apollo missions, a young intern stumbled upon something truly terrifying. Hidden within the background noise of moonquakes and meteor impacts, he found a rhythmic, pulsating signal. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And it was coming from deep within the moon. He called Dr. Aris over, his voice shaking. Aris listened intently, his face growing paler with each passing second. He recognized the pattern. It was similar to the mathematical language Chen's team had deciphered. But this wasn't just a transmission. This was something else, something far more disturbing. "It's a heartbeat," Aris whispered, his voice barely audible. "The moon, it's alive." The room fell into a stunned silence. The wind howled outside, a mournful dirge echoing the terrifying realization dawning upon them. The craters weren't just evidence of mining. They were scars. And the moon wasn't just a celestial body. It was an egg, and something was about to hatch. The next morning, the radio telescopes around the world picked up a new signal emanating from the moon. It was no longer faint or intermittent. It was loud, clear, and undeniably intentional. It was the same rhythmic pulsating pattern, the heartbeat, amplified 1,000-fold. And it was growing stronger with each passing moment. The moon, scarred and hollowed, hung heavy in the sky, a silent, ominous presence. The craters, once a testament to alien industry, now seemed like gaping eyes, staring down at Earth with a cold, calculating gaze. The wind picked up in the Nevada desert, swirling the dust into miniature tornadoes, a reflection of the growing storm brewing in the hearts of everyone at the base. They knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was inside the moon was about to awaken. And humanity was utterly unprepared. Part 3. Whispers of the Void. The silence of the lunar module became a suffocating presence. The revelation from Houston, the discovery of geometrically precise tunnels beneath the Copernicus crater, hung in the air like a phantom. It wasn't the confirmation of alien life that chilled me to the bone, but the implications of their industry, their scale of operation. We had romanticized first contact, envisioned ambassadors and exchanges of knowledge. This wasn't that. This was a cosmic strip mine, and we were the latecomers. They must have been immense, Michael finally muttered, breaking the tense quiet. He was staring at the Copernicus crater on the monitor, its familiar features now sinister, concealing a subterranean world. Immense and ancient, I replied, my voice a strained whisper. The preliminary dating placed the tunnels at millions, possibly billions, of years old. What kind of civilization could carve the moon like this, and where were they now? The question echoed in the vast emptiness between Earth and its satellite. Over the next few hours, the transmissions from Houston became increasingly fragmented, punctuated by bursts of static and cryptic warnings. They were having trouble maintaining a stable connection with the lunar orbiter that had discovered the tunnels, the same one that had gone eerily silent weeks before being inexplicably reactivated. The feeling of isolation, already palpable within the cramped confines of the lunar module, intensified. We're picking up anomalous readings from the crater, crackled a voice from mission control, strained and anxious. Energy signatures unlike anything we've ever encountered. Michael looked at me, his face pale in the dim light. Energy signatures? What kind? The reply was chillingly vague. Fluctuations, shifting patterns. It's like something's waking up. The remaining hours of the journey were a blur of apprehension and dread. We performed our pre-landing checks mechanically, our minds preoccupied with the unsettling news from Earth. The moon, once a beacon of scientific curiosity, had transformed into a harbinger of the unknown. As we descended towards the designated landing zone near the Apennine Mountains, the Copernicus crater remained visible on the horizon, a dark, brooding eye watching our approach. The lunar landscape stretched out before us, desolate and starkly beautiful, but its beauty was now tainted with an unnerving sense of artificiality. We touched down smoothly, the slight jolt a welcome distraction from the oppressive silence. But the silence was short-lived. As we began the post-landing procedures, a low, resonant hum filled the cabin. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it quickly grew in intensity, vibrating through the metal frame of the module. What the hell is that? Michael shouted, his voice barely audible over the growing drone. I checked the instrument panel, searching for any indication of a malfunction. Everything appeared normal, yet the humming persisted, growing stronger, deeper. It felt as if the moon itself was groaning. We contacted Houston, relaying the strange phenomenon, but the response was garbled, distorted by static. The only discernible words were, "Get out, crater, danger." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my professional detachment. The hum was now a physical force, pressing against my eardrums, vibrating in my bones. The lunar module, our sanctuary, felt like a fragile eggshell. "We need to abort," Michael yelled, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here." I knew he was right. Something was happening on the moon, something beyond our comprehension, and we were caught in its wake. But as I reached for the launch controls, the hum intensified into a deafening roar, and the module began to shake violently. A blinding white light flooded the cabin, erasing the familiar lunar landscape on the monitors. The roar subsided, replaced by a profound silence, deeper and more unsettling than any we had experienced before. Then, a new sound emerged, a faint whisper, like 1,000 voices murmuring in the vacuum of space. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the walls of the lunar module, from within the moon itself. And it was calling our names. The last transmission from Apollo 18 was a single, chilling scream, cut short by a burst of static. The moon, once a symbol of human ambition, now held a terrifying secret, a secret that echoed in the whispers of the void. And we were only beginning to understand the true meaning of the craters that scarred its surface. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 4. The silence of the lunar module was broken only by the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tanks and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The transmission from mission control, confirming the anomalous readings from the crater Tycho, played on a loop in my mind. Concentrated mass. Unlike anything we've encountered, gravitational distortion. I peered through the triangular window. Tycho, a vast, shadowed abyss below. The sun, a harsh white disk against the velvet black, cast long, distorted shadows across the crater floor, making it impossible to discern any detail. It felt like looking into the maw of some colossal, unknowable beast. Ready to descend, Commander? Dr. Anya Sharma's voice, usually calm and analytical, was laced with a tremor I'd never heard before. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat making it difficult. As ready as I'll ever be, Doctor. The descent was agonizingly slow. The closer we got to Tycho, the more erratic the instruments became. The altimeter flickered wildly, the gravity readings fluctuated, and a low, guttural hum vibrated through the module, a sound completely alien to the vacuum of space. Anya gripped the armrest, her knuckles white. The distortion is intensifying, Commander. It's as if space itself is bending around the crater. We touched down on the crater floor with a jarring thud. The silence that followed was absolute, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the descent. It was a silence that pressed in, heavy and suffocating. External cameras activated, I reported, my voice strained. The images flickered onto the monitor, revealing a desolate, gray landscape. The shadows danced and shifted, playing tricks on my eyes. I scanned the area, searching for something, anything that could explain the readings. Then I saw it, a glint of metallic reflection in the distance, barely discernible against the dark lunar rock. Zoom in on that area, Doctor, I instructed, my pulse quickening. As the camera zoomed, the reflection resolved into a vast, smooth surface, stretching for kilometers. It was perfectly flat, unnervingly so, like a sheet of polished obsidian embedded in the lunar surface. What is that? Anya whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know, I replied, my heart pounding against my ribs. But we're going to find out. We donned our suits, the familiar routine offering little comfort. Stepping out onto the lunar surface felt different this time. The airlock hissed shut behind us, sealing us in this alien landscape. The gravity, though weaker than Earth's, felt wrong, somehow. It was as if the moon itself was holding its breath. The rover hummed softly as we drove towards the anomaly. The closer we got, the more pronounced the sense of unease became. The hum vibrating through the module earlier was now audible outside the suits, a low, resonant drone that seemed to emanate from the smooth, black surface. We stopped a few meters from the edge. The surface was impossibly smooth, reflecting the harsh sunlight like a mirror. It looked artificial. It's like glass, Anya said, her voice trembling. But on a scale. She trailed off, unable to find the words. I reached out a gloved hand and touched the surface. It was cold, smooth, and utterly alien. A faint vibration ran up my arm, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Commander, Anya's voice was urgent. Look. She pointed to a section of the surface where a faint, pulsating light emanated from beneath. The light intensified, spreading across the surface like veins of molten gold. The humming grew louder, resonating deep within my chest. Then, the surface began to move. Slowly, silently, a section of the black glass slid back, revealing a gaping darkness beneath. The humming intensified, morphing into a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. The air crackled with static electricity. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, my gaze fixed on the chasm that had opened before us. It was impossibly deep, the darkness absolute, as if it swallowed all light. The air shimmered above the opening, distorted by some unseen force. And then, something moved within the darkness. A shape, vast and undefined, shifted in the depths, its edges blurring in the shimmering air. It was impossible to make out any details, but the sheer scale of it was terrifying. It was something ancient, something powerful, something not of this world. A guttural roar, low and resonant, echoed from the depths, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. It was a sound that spoke of unimaginable power, of ancient hunger, of something that should have remained undisturbed. I grabbed Anya's arm. We have to go. Now. We scrambled back into the rover, our movements clumsy and panicked. As I turned the ignition, I cast one last glance back at the chasm. The shape within the darkness was rising, slowly, inexorably, its form becoming clearer with every passing second. And then, I saw its eyes. 2 points of burning crimson, staring up from the abyss, filled with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. They were watching us. They knew we were there. And they were coming. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 5 of 25. The silence in mission control was thicker than the lunar dust clinging to Armstrong's boots. A silence punctuated only by the frantic tapping of keyboards and the hushed whispers between technicians. The feed from the rover camera, projected onto the main screen, showed a desolate landscape, the sharp shadows stretching long and ominous under the alien sun. The rover, now a kilometer from the anomalous crater designated Echo 1, continued its slow, cautious advance. The data stream from its sensors painted a grim picture. Background radiation levels were climbing steadily, the magnetic field fluctuated erratically, and the seismic readings showed tremors, almost imperceptible, but persistent, like a giant heart beating deep within the moon. Dr. Aris Thorne, his face etched with a mixture of fascination and dread, watched the feed with an unwavering gaze. He chewed on the end of his pen, a nervous habit he hadn't been able to shake since the mission began. The last transmission from Armstrong had been clipped, ending mid-sentence with a burst of static, just as the rover's camera had caught sight of the crater rim. The unsettling quiet that followed had settled on mission control like a shroud. "Any word from Armstrong?" Thorne asked, his voice raspy. Johnson, the mission commander, shook his head, his eyes glued to the communication panel. "Nothing but static. We're trying to re-establish contact, but the interference is unusual. Almost patterned." "Patterned?" Thorne echoed, a chill crawling down his spine. "Yeah," Johnson replied, pointing to a waveform displayed on a nearby monitor. "See the peaks and troughs? They're repeating. It's almost like a signal. But unlike anything we've ever encountered." Thorne leaned closer, his eyes scrutinizing the complex pattern. It looked almost organic. Like the rhythmic pulsation of some colossal, unseen entity. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. The rover reached the edge of ECHO-1. The crater was vast, much larger than it appeared from orbit, stretching out before the rover like a gaping maw. Its interior was shrouded in an unnatural darkness that seemed to absorb the sunlight. The rover's sensors went haywire, bombarded with data that defied explanation. The radiation levels spiked, the magnetic field went into a frenzy, and the seismic readings registered a low, resonant hum that vibrated through mission control's very foundations. Then, the rover's camera caught it. A glimmer, deep within the crater's darkness. A metallic gleam, too perfect, too symmetrical to be natural. It shifted, moved, and then another appeared, and another, until dozens of them were visible, like eyes blinking open in the abyss. A collective gasp rippled through mission control. Thorne felt his heart pound in his chest. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, what they were looking at. Machines. Alien machines. The rover, under remote control, crept closer to the edge of the crater, its camera zooming in on the metallic glints. They were massive, complex structures, unlike anything Thorne had ever imagined. They seemed to be embedded in the crater walls, connected by a network of cables and conduits that snaked across the lunar surface. The humming grew louder, resonating through the rover's speakers and filling mission control with an oppressive drone. Suddenly, one of the machines moved. It shifted its position, a slow, deliberate movement that belied its immense size, and then a beam of light, blindingly bright, shot out from its core, lancing across the crater and striking the opposite wall. The impact was silent, but the rover camera captured the aftermath. A section of the wall, several meters wide, simply vanished, leaving behind a smooth, perfectly circular hole. Thorne watched in horrified fascination. The machines were mining, stripping the moon of its resources, carving it up like a carcass. But for what purpose? And where were the miners? Just then, the static on the communication channel cleared. A voice, weak and strained, crackled through the speakers. It's incredible," Armstrong's voice whispered, filled with awe and a strange, unsettling undercurrent of fear. They're everywhere. Down there, in the darkness. Another burst of static. Then silence. Johnson slammed his fist on the console. Armstrong, report. What do you see? The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Then, a new sound emerged from the speakers, a sound that made Thorne's blood run cold. A low, guttural chanting, emanating not from Armstrong, but from the depths of the crater itself. It rose and fell in a rhythmic cadence, weaving itself into the humming of the machines, creating a symphony of alien industry that resonated with an ancient, unknowable power. The rover's camera, now pointed directly into the heart of the crater, captured the source of the chanting. Silhouettes, dozens of them, moving in the darkness between the machines. Not human, not anything Thorne could comprehend. They were tall and slender, their forms insectoid, with long, spindly limbs and what appeared to be large, multifaceted eyes that gleamed in the darkness. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, their movements perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of the chanting and the humming of the machines. They were the miners, and they had been waiting. The feed from the rover cut out. The screen went black. The chanting stopped. The humming faded. Only the silence remained, heavier, more oppressive than ever before. Thorne felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the moon was not what they thought it was. It was not a barren rock, but a hive. A living, breathing entity, infested with something ancient and alien. And they had just woken it up. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 6. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic hiss of the recycled air. The lunar dust, clinging stubbornly to my boots, felt suddenly colder. Martinez's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. A civilization capable of such colossal engineering, a civilization that treated the moon as its personal quarry, was a civilization beyond our comprehension, potentially beyond our control. We continued deeper into the labyrinth, the beam of my headlamp bouncing off the smooth, unnatural curves of the tunnel. The air grew thinner, the silence deeper. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it felt like a void, a sucking emptiness that pressed against my eardrums and clawed at the edges of my sanity. We reached a vast cavern, its dimensions dwarfing anything we'd seen before. Our headlamps, inadequate for such a space, revealed only a fraction of its immensity. The floor sloped downwards, disappearing into an impenetrable darkness. The walls, though still unnervingly smooth, were now etched with complex, geometric patterns that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. They weren't carvings, not precisely. They seemed to be intrinsic to the material itself, as if the very rock had been woven into these intricate designs. My God, breathed Anya, her voice barely a whisper. I felt a tremor beneath my feet, a subtle vibration that traveled up my legs and settled in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't a moonquake, not in the traditional sense. It felt rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Did you feel that? Martinez asked, his voice tight. Before I could answer, the silence was broken. Not by a sound, but by a feeling. A presence. An awareness. It was as if the cavern itself had become sentient, its vast emptiness suddenly filled with an unseen observer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The air grew thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Then, we saw it. In the distance, at the very edge of our lamp beams, a faint light flickered. It grew steadily brighter, revealing a structure, or perhaps a machine, unlike anything I'd ever imagined. It was colossal, dwarfing even the cavern itself, its forms shifting and shimmering as if it were composed of pure light. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, echoing the tremor we had felt earlier. We stood there, transfixed, unable to move, unable to speak. The sheer scale of the thing, its alien beauty, its palpable power, rendered us speechless. It was like staring into the heart of creation, witnessing a force beyond human understanding. The pulsing light intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and writhed across the cavern walls. The geometric patterns on the walls began to glow, resonating with the light from the machine. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Then, the machine spoke. Not with sound, but with a feeling, a direct transmission into our minds. It wasn't a language, not as we understood it. It was more like a concept, an idea, a vast and complex understanding of the universe that flooded our consciousness, overwhelming our senses. It spoke of ages past, of cosmic journeys, of the manipulation of matter and energy on a scale that defied comprehension. It spoke of the moon, not as a celestial body, but as a resource, a stepping stone on a journey far beyond our solar system. It spoke of us, humans, as insignificant, fleeting, a momentary flicker in the grand tapestry of time. The information poured into us, a torrent of knowledge that threatened to shatter our sanity. I felt my mind stretching, straining to accommodate this alien perspective. The world around me began to distort, the cavern walls melting into swirling patterns of light and shadow. I could hear Anya whimpering beside me, her face contorted in a mask of terror. Martinez stood rigid, his eyes wide and unseeing, his body trembling. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the transmission ceased. The light from the machine dimmed, the geometric patterns on the walls faded, and the oppressive presence lifted. The cavern was silent once more, empty, yet somehow charged with an unseen energy. We stood there, breathing heavily, our minds reeling from the experience. The world around us seemed fragile, unreal. The reality we had known, the comfortable assumptions we had held about the universe, had been shattered, replaced by a chilling new perspective. What was that? Anya whispered, her voice trembling. Martinez shook his head slowly, his face pale. I don't know, but I think we've just been given a warning. The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. A warning from whom? And what did it mean? As we turned to retrace our steps, the rhythmic tremor returned, a subtle pulse that resonated not just through the cavern, but through the very fabric of the moon itself. It felt like a heartbeat, slow, steady, inexorable. The heartbeat of something ancient, something powerful, something watching, something waiting. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 7. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tanks. Dr. Aris Thorne, his face pale and drawn, stared at the screen displaying the enhanced images from the lunar rover. The tracks, so clearly artificial, disappeared into the inky blackness of the newly discovered chasm. It was an abyss, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the very light projected into it. Are we certain it's artificial? Commander Eva Rostova's voice was tight with a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. She, too, was captivated by the unsettling image. Could it be a natural formation, a lava tube collapsed under its own weight? The regularity of the tracks, Aris pointed a trembling finger at the screen, their consistent depth, the complete absence of ejecta around the chasm. It's too precise, Eva. Too deliberate. It defies all known geological processes. The rest of the crew in the lunar habitat, geologist Dr. Chen Li and systems engineer Dmitry Volkov, remained silent, their faces reflecting the same unsettling mix of awe and dread. They had all witnessed the escalating strangeness of the mission. The odd electromagnetic fluctuations, the unervingly symmetrical crater formations they had initially dismissed as pareidolia, and now, this gaping, unnatural wound in the lunar surface. We need to send a probe down, Eva finally said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hand as she reached for the comms panel. Houston, this is Artemis Base. Requesting permission to deploy the Boreas probe into the designated chasm. Over. The response was immediate, laced with barely concealed apprehension. Artemis Base, this is Houston. We understand your request, but we advise caution. The readings you're transmitting are anomalous. Stand by. The wait was agonizing. Every flicker of static from the comms panel felt like a hammer blow against their fragile sanity. The moon, once a familiar celestial body, had transformed into something alien, something unknowable. Finally, Houston's voice crackled through again, strained. Artemis Base, you are authorized to deploy Boreas. Proceed with extreme caution. We are monitoring all telemetry. The Boreas probe, equipped with high-resolution cameras, sensor arrays, and a powerful spotlight, descended into the chasm. The live feed painted a picture of absolute darkness, a void that seemed to absorb the probe's light without reflecting any back. The silence was even more profound than the lunar surface, a heavy, oppressive blanket that smothered all sound. Readings are off the charts, Dmitri announced, his voice hushed. The electromagnetic field is fluctuating wildly, and the gravitational readings, they're inconsistent, almost as if. He trailed off, unable to articulate the thought that was forming in his mind. As if what, Dmitri? Eva prompted, her gaze fixed on the screen. As if the laws of physics are different down there, he finally whispered. The probe continued its descent, the beam of its spotlight swallowed by the impenetrable darkness. Suddenly, the feed flickered. A wave of static washed across the screen, followed by a fleeting image. It was only a fraction of a second, a blurry, distorted glimpse, but it was enough to send a chill down the spines of everyone in the habitat. It appeared to be a structure, vast and angular, shimmering with an unnatural luminescence. Geometric shapes, impossible angles, and a surface that seemed to shift and undulate like liquid metal. Then, the feed cut out entirely. Silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical presence. Boreas, do you read? Eva's voice was barely a whisper, her hand gripping the comms panel until her knuckles turned white. No response. Boreas, respond. Report status. Her voice rose, laced with desperation. Still nothing. Aris looked away from the dead screen, his gaze drifting towards the viewport. The Earth hung in the black sky, a vibrant blue marble against the stark lunar landscape. It seemed so far away, so impossibly distant. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a primal fear that whispered of something ancient and powerful lurking beneath the surface of the moon. Something that had been patiently waiting, watching, perhaps even shaping the very history of humanity from its hidden lair. What have we awakened? He murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tanks, a chilling reminder of their fragile existence in this alien landscape. They were alone, stranded on the moon, with something unknown stirring beneath their feet. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that the silence wouldn't last forever. Something was coming. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 8 of 25. The silence in mission control was thicker than the lunar dust clinging to Armstrong's boots. His transmission, or rather the lack of it after that single, chilling whisper, had frozen the room. The technicians hovered over their consoles, faces illuminated by the flickering screens, looking less like scientists and more like terrified acolytes at a forbidden ritual. Even the ever-optimistic Dr. Ramirez had gone pale, his usual buoyant energy replaced by a nervous tremor in his hands. Signal lost, a technician finally croaked, his voice barely audible above the hum of the machinery. Complete signal loss. The room erupted, not in panic, but in a confused murmur. Theories, ranging from equipment malfunction to solar flares, were tossed around like life rafts in a storm, each more flimsy than the last. But the unspoken fear hung heavy in the air. Armstrong had seen something. Something that silenced him. Days blurred into a nightmare. The world held its breath, clinging to the hope that communication would be re-established, that Armstrong and Aldrin would complete their mission and return home safely. But the moon remained stubbornly silent. The orbital module, Columbia, continued its lonely vigil, circling the silent lunar landscape, waiting for a signal that never came. Back on Earth, the whispers began. The official story, a communication failure, was met with increasing skepticism. The grainy images of the moon's surface, previously symbols of human ingenuity and exploration, now seemed ominous, the cratered landscape a silent testament to something unknown. Conspiracy theories flourished, fueled by the government's tight-lipped responses and the chilling final transmission. Then, the nightmares started. Not just among the team at Mission Control, but across the globe. People reported vivid, unsettling dreams of vast, shadowed caverns beneath the lunar surface, of strange, angular structures glinting in the dim light. Some dreamed of being watched by unseen eyes, of a silent, oppressive presence that filled them with a primal dread. The dreams were always the same, the moon, silent and watchful, hiding a terrible secret. Dr. Ramirez, haunted by both the silence from the moon and the recurring nightmares, became obsessed. He pored over every detail of the mission, every photograph, every line of data. He isolated himself, refusing visitors, his office becoming a chaotic shrine to the Apollo 11 mission. His colleagues watched him with a mixture of pity and fear, witnessing his descent into obsession. One evening, a week after the silence fell, Dr. Ramirez stumbled into mission control, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of fear and elation. He clutched a handful of photographs, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold them. The room fell silent as he approached the main screen, his face illuminated by the ghostly image of the moon. "I've seen it," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I've seen what Armstrong saw." He spread the photographs across the console. They were enhanced images of the cratered landscape, zoomed in to an almost pixelated level. At first glance, they seemed to show nothing unusual. But then, as Dr. Ramirez pointed a trembling finger at a specific area, a chill ran through the room. Within the shadowed depths of a particularly large crater, a subtle, geometric shape could be discerned. It was too regular to be a natural formation, too precise to be a trick of the light. It looked like a structure. An artificial structure. "It's there," Ramirez whispered, his voice laced with awe and terror. "It's been there all along, hidden in plain sight. They're mining the moon. They've been mining it for centuries, maybe millennia." He pointed to another photograph, this one showing a different crater. A similar, albeit smaller, structure was visible within its depths. Then another, and another. The room was silent, the implications of Ramirez's discovery too horrifying to comprehend. "The nightmares," someone murmured, their voice barely audible. "The structures, they're the same." Ramirez nodded slowly. "They're communicating," he whispered. "Not through radio waves, but through something else. Something that reaches into our minds, into our dreams. They're showing us, warning us." He looked up at the image of the moon on the main screen, his eyes filled with a chilling certainty. "They know we're here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And they don't want us to come back." The silence in mission control deepened, heavier now, laden with a new, terrifying understanding. The moon, once a symbol of human ambition, now loomed over them, a silent, watchful presence, hiding a secret far more terrible than any of them could have imagined. And somewhere, in the shadowed depths of its craters, something was stirring. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 9. The silence in mission control was heavier than the lunar regolith clinging to Armstrong's boots. The grainy images transmitted from the rover's camera painted a desolate, alien landscape. No majestic mountains, no sprawling craters. Just a flat, gray expanse stretching to the horizon, pockmarked by unnatural, geometric depressions. It was like someone had taken a giant cookie cutter to the lunar surface. "This isn't right," whispered Dr. Anya Sharma, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and terror. "The geological surveys, the orbital scans, none of it showed this." "What are we looking at?" Commander Johnson's voice, usually a bastion of calm authority, wavered. "I don't know," Anya replied, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "But it's structured, deliberate." The rover crept forward, its wheels leaving faint tracks on the undisturbed dust. As it approached the edge of one of the geometric depressions, a low hum resonated from the speakers, a subsonic thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of mission control. "What's that sound?" a young technician asked, his face pale. Anya shook her head, her fingers flying across the console, trying to isolate the source. "It's coming from the rover's seismic sensors. Something's causing vibrations beneath the surface." The rover inched closer to the edge. The depression wasn't a crater in the traditional sense. It was more like a perfectly rectangular pit, its sides smooth and sharply defined, descending into an inky blackness. The hum intensified, morphing into a pulsating drone that filled the room. "Pull it back," Johnson ordered, his voice strained. "Pull the rover back." But it was too late. The ground beneath the rover shimmered, the gray dust dissolving to reveal a slick, obsidian-like surface. Before anyone could react, the ground gave way, and the rover plummeted into the darkness. The feed from its camera cut out abruptly, replaced by static. The pulsating drone ceased, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. Anya slammed her fist on the console, a wave of nausea washing over her. "We lost it. We lost the rover." The room erupted in a cacophony of panicked whispers. The implications were terrifying. Whatever lay beneath the lunar surface had swallowed their rover whole. It was a chilling confirmation of their worst fears. "We need to reassess," Johnson said, his voice regaining some of its authority. "This changes everything." He turned to Dr. Michael Chen, the mission's geologist. "Michael, what can you tell us about these depressions?" Chen, his face ashen, pointed to a geological map projected on the main screen. "They're aligned," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They form a perfect grid, covering almost a third of the far side of the moon." He zoomed in on the map, revealing a network of intersecting lines, each marked by the rectangular depressions. The pattern was too precise, too regular to be natural. It was undeniably artificial. "It's a mine," Anya whispered, her voice trembling. "A massive, lunar mine." The realization hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The craters weren't impact scars. They were evidence of something far more sinister, far more unsettling. They were the remnants of an ancient, alien industry, a testament to a civilization that had carved up the moon for its resources. And now, whatever had created this mine seemed to be stirring once more. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Satellite imagery was reanalyzed, geological data re-examined. The pattern of the depressions was mapped and charted, revealing a scale of operation that dwarfed anything humans had ever conceived. The implications were staggering. If the moon had been mined on this scale, what had they been looking for? And where had they gone? More importantly, were they gone at all? As the Earth rose over the lunar horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the desolate landscape, a chilling thought crept into Anya's mind. What if the rover hadn't simply fallen into a pit? What if it had been taken? A low hum resonated through mission control, the same subsonic thrumming that had preceded the rover's disappearance. This time, however, it was louder, closer. The lights flickered, the monitors buzzed, and a wave of static washed over the communications systems. Johnson grabbed the microphone, his voice tight with fear. "Report. What's happening?" A technician stammered, his eyes wide with terror. The seismic sensors. Something's moving beneath us. Something big." The ground beneath mission control trembled. A deep, guttural roar echoed from the depths of the earth, shaking the very foundations of the building. Anya looked at the faces around her, etched with fear and disbelief. They had stumbled upon something far older, far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. And now, it was waking up. The screen displaying the lunar landscape flickered once more, then went dark. In its place, a single, chilling image appeared. It was a close-up of one of the rectangular depressions, the obsidian-like surface reflecting a distorted, alien visage. Two glowing, crimson eyes stared back at them, burning with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The horror had begun. Part 10. The Whispers of the Regolith. The lunar dust, clinging to our suits like spectral dandruff, seemed to vibrate. Not a physical tremor, but a deeper, more unsettling hum that resonated within our bones. Even through the thick gloves, I felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity building on my skin. Javier muttered something in Spanish, his voice tight with unease. Lena, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to fatigue and the strange acoustics within the crater. But I knew better. This wasn't fatigue. This was the moon speaking. We continued our descent, the lunar rover crawling down the gentle slope of Tycho crater. The massive central peak, a jagged spire reaching for the black sky, seemed to observe our progress with silent disapproval. The comms remained stubbornly silent, no response from Earth. The isolation was becoming palpable, a suffocating blanket woven from the silence of space and the whispers of the regolith. The rover's headlights cut through the perpetual twilight, revealing a landscape both desolate and oddly familiar. The dust-covered slopes, punctuated by scattered boulders, resembled a derelict construction site, an impression amplified by the geometric precision of certain crater formations. We reached the designated excavation site, a relatively flat area near the base of the central peak. The readings from the orbital scans had indicated an anomalous density beneath the surface, suggesting the presence of a large, metallic object. As Javier set up the drilling rig, Lena and I began collecting regolith samples. The silence was broken only by the whirring of the drill and the crunch of our boots on the lunar surface. It was then that I heard it again. A faint whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves in a phantom wind. I paused, my shovel hovering over the gray dust. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lena glanced up, her face pale in the reflected earthlight. "Hear what, Dr. Anya?" "A rustling sound, like something moving beneath the surface." Lena shook her head. "I think the isolation is getting to you, Anya. There's nothing here but rock and dust." But I knew what I had heard. It was a subtle sound, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a chilling resonance, like fingernails scratching against a chalkboard buried deep within the moon. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent. The drill suddenly stopped, the whirring replaced by a high-pitched whine. Javier cursed, his voice crackling through the comm system. "Something's wrong. The drill bit, it's stuck." We approached the rig, our hearts pounding in our chests. The drill bit, normally a gleaming silver, was now coated in a thick, black substance that resembled tar. It pulsed faintly, emitting a low, guttural hum that resonated with the whispers I'd heard earlier. The black substance seemed to writhe and shift, like a living organism. "What in God's name is that?" Lena breathed, her voice barely audible. Javier cautiously reached out and touched the substance with a gloved finger. The moment his finger made contact, the black substance surged, flowing up his arm like liquid darkness. He screamed, ripping his hand away, but it was too late. The substance clung to his suit, spreading rapidly, its guttural hum growing louder, more menacing. Panic seized us. We scrambled back, watching in horror as the black substance enveloped Javier, his struggles growing weaker with each passing second. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of inhuman voices, echoing through the desolate landscape. The moon was alive, and it was hungry. The black substance, having consumed Javier, pulsed and throbbed, slowly taking on a humanoid shape. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling voice, emanating from the newly formed figure. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet I grasped its meaning with terrifying clarity. "We were here first. Asterisk." The figure, a grotesque parody of human form, turned towards us, its black eyes burning with malevolent intent. The regolith beneath its feet seemed to writhe and churn, as if the very moon itself was recoiling in disgust. Lena screamed, turning and fleeing towards the rover. I hesitated, frozen by terror, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before me. The figure began to advance, its movements slow and deliberate, each step accompanied by the sickening crunch of the lunar dust. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar inside my head. "Leave. This is not your place." Asterisk. I stumbled back, my legs trembling, the earthlight reflecting off the figure's obsidian skin. The moon wasn't just mined. It was infested, and we were trapped in its web. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were not alone on the moon. And whatever was here, it did not want us to leave. Part 11. Whispers in the Static. The lunar dust clung to everything, a fine, gray shroud that seemed to absorb light and sound. Even within the pressurized rover, I felt its oppressive presence. The silence, broken only by the whirring of the life support systems and the crackle of the comms, was more unsettling than any outright noise. Mission Control's updates were infrequent now, their voices strained, laced with a fatigue that mirrored my own. The investigation into the cavern's depths had been postponed. The tremors hadn't ceased, but intensified, resonating through the chassis of the rover, a constant, low thrum that vibrated in my bones. "Houston, are you reading me?" I asked, my voice echoing faintly in my helmet. The reply, when it came, was distorted, broken by static. "Reading, intermittent, interference, origin unknown." I glanced at the seismograph readings. The tremors were growing stronger, more frequent. The moon, it seemed, was waking up. A chilling thought crept into my mind. What if these weren't just tremors, but something deliberate? "A signal. Houston, I'm detecting increased seismic activity. It's escalating. Static. More static." Then, a voice, but not from Houston. A low, guttural whisper, a sound that seemed to bypass the headphones and resonate directly within my skull. It wasn't a language I recognized, more like the grinding of tectonic plates, the groaning of a dying star. It spoke of age, of immense power, and something else, something malevolent. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Hear what, Amelia?" Houston's voice, faint, distant. Had they even heard it? A voice. A whispering. "It wasn't you." Silence. Then, negative, "No other transmissions. Check your systems." My systems were fine. I ran diagnostics. Everything nominal. But the whispering persisted, growing louder, weaving itself into the static, becoming a chorus of unsettling murmurs. It felt as if the moon itself was speaking, its ancient voice finally breaking through the silence of millennia. I looked out at the desolate landscape, at the craters that now seemed less like scars and more like eyes. Watching, waiting. The tremors intensified, shaking the rover violently. I gripped the controls, fighting to maintain stability. Outside, the dust swirled, forming eerie, ephemeral shapes in the dim light. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, drowning out the static, drowning out Houston's increasingly frantic calls. It was inside my head now, a cacophony of alien whispers, a symphony of dread. "Amelia, report. What's happening?" Houston's voice, strained, desperate. I tried to respond, but the whispers overwhelmed me. They spoke of things beyond human comprehension, of cosmic horrors and ancient entities. They painted images in my mind, visions of vast, cyclopean structures buried beneath the lunar surface, of unimaginable beings stirring from their eons-long slumber. The rover lurched violently, throwing me against the restraints. Outside, the dust storm intensified, swirling into a vortex of gray, obscuring everything beyond the rover's immediate vicinity. The ground beneath us began to crack, splitting open in jagged fissures. The whispering reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled my mind, obliterating all other thought. And then, I saw it. Through the swirling dust, a shape began to emerge. Vast, monolithic. It rose from the fissure, dwarfing the rover, dwarfing everything. It was blacker than the void of space, its surface shimmering with an unnatural luminescence. Its form defied description, a grotesque parody of geometry, all angles and curves and impossible dimensions. It was ancient, alien, and utterly terrifying. The whispering ceased. The dust settled. The rover rocked gently, as if in the aftermath of a storm. The monolithic structure loomed before me, its presence filling the lunar landscape. It was a monument to an alien power beyond human comprehension, a testament to the terrifying truth hidden beneath the moon's surface. And I, Amelia Reed, astronaut and explorer, was alone with it. Trapped in the silent, watchful gaze of whatever lurked within. My comms crackled. A faint, distorted voice, barely audible above the static. "Amelia, do you read?" I couldn't respond. My voice was lost, swallowed by the immensity of the horror before me. All I could do was stare, frozen in terror, as the monolithic structure began to move. It was reaching for me. Part 12. Whispers in the static. The lunar dust, clinging to our boots like spectral gray moss, seemed to amplify the silence. Even the whir of the life support systems in our suits felt muted, swallowed by the vast, oppressive emptiness. We'd reached the lip of the designated crater, Tycho, its jagged rim silhouetted against the unforgiving blackness of space. It was deeper, far deeper, than any satellite imagery had suggested. The bottom was lost in an unnatural gloom, a darkness that seemed to absorb light, a black hole in the already black lunar landscape. "Readings?" Dr. Anya Sharma's voice, normally crisp and assured, crackled with a noticeable tremor. "Electromagnetic interference is off the charts," Ramirez replied, his tone equally strained. "Something's down there, messing with our equipment. And the gravity, it's fluctuating." My own instruments were behaving erratically. The compass needle spun wildly, the radiation detector clicked in a frantic, irregular rhythm. A cold dread, colder even than the lunar vacuum, seeped into my bones. We were teetering on the precipice of something unknowable, something profoundly disturbing. "Mission Control, do you read?" Anya called, her voice tight with anxiety. The static that had plagued our communications intensified, a swirling cacophony of white noise that seemed to claw at our sanity. A garbled, almost unintelligible response crackled through our headsets, a desperate plea to return, to abandon the descent. But it was too late. We were already committed. Slowly, cautiously, we began our descent into the crater. The unnatural darkness deepened with every step, swallowing us whole. Our headlamps cut through the gloom, revealing the sheer walls of the crater, striated with strange, geometric patterns that defied natural explanation. They looked carved, deliberate, as if some colossal entity had used the moon as a canvas, etching its inscrutable designs onto the lunar surface. Then, we heard it. A low, humming sound, almost sub-audible, resonated through the lunar regolith. It vibrated through our boots, through our suits, through the very marrow of our bones. It wasn't a mechanical sound, not exactly. It was more organic, more alive. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic cadence, like a heartbeat, a gargantuan, otherworldly heartbeat. What is that? Ramirez whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming. I shook my head, unable to speak. Fear, raw and primal, had gripped me, paralyzing me. The humming grew louder, more insistent, accompanied now by another sound, a faint whispering, like voices carried on the wind. It was a language I didn't recognize, alien and unsettling. It seemed to slither into our minds, insinuating itself into our thoughts. A chorus of whispers promising power, knowledge, oblivion. We pressed on, drawn deeper into the crater by some unseen force. The walls narrowed, closing in around us like the throat of some monstrous beast. The air grew heavy, oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. The whispering intensified, becoming more distinct, more coherent. I could almost make out words, phrases, fragments of sentences that hinted at an ancient, unimaginable history. Then, the ground beneath us trembled. A blinding light erupted from the depths of the crater, momentarily banishing the darkness. We shielded our eyes, momentarily blinded by the sudden illumination. When our vision cleared, we gasped. At the bottom of the crater, nestled within the unnatural gloom, lay a structure, vast and complex, shimmering with an ethereal, otherworldly light. It was unlike anything we had ever seen, a colossal edifice of angles and curves, of shimmering surfaces and pulsating lights, a monument to an alien intelligence beyond our comprehension. The humming reached a crescendo, the whispers a fever pitch. The structure pulsed with energy, the light growing brighter, more intense. The ground shook violently, cracks appearing in the lunar surface. We stumbled, falling to our knees, the sheer force of the unknown pressing down on us, crushing us. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The humming subsided, the whispers died away. The structure vanished, swallowed once more by the unnatural gloom. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the frantic beating of our hearts. We stood there, dazed and disoriented, trying to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Had it been real, or had the alien environment, the isolation, the fear, finally driven us mad? Then, Anya screamed. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. She was pointing towards the crater wall, her face a mask of terror. Following her gaze, I saw it. Scrawled across the rock face, etched in deep, glowing lines, was a single word, a word that sent a chill of pure, unadulterated horror down my spine. Leave. The word hung there, a silent, ominous warning. And in that moment, I knew, with terrifying certainty, that we were not alone. And we were most definitely not welcome. Part 13. The silence of the regulators. The lunar dust settled, coating the rover in a fine, gray film. Inside, we huddled, the recycled air thick with tension. Alina's frantic calculations filled the comms, a desperate attempt to reconcile the impossible readings from the crater. The energy signature wasn't dissipating, it was shifting, pulsating, like a lung expanding and contracting. It's moving, she finally choked out, her voice tight with fear. The source, it's moving under the surface. My stomach lurched. The implications were horrifying. If this wasn't just a mining operation, but something living, then the scale of what we were facing became exponentially more terrifying. We have to go, I said, my voice harder than I intended. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. But the samples, David protested, his voice strained. We're so close. Close to what, David? Elena snapped. Close to becoming another crater? He fell silent, the unspoken fear echoing in the confined space. We had come here seeking answers, but the moon was offering only chilling riddles in return. We prepped for departure, the movements robotic, each of us lost in our own terrifying thoughts. As we lifted off, the crater below seemed to watch us, a silent, accusing eye in the desolate landscape. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with an unseen gaze. The journey back to the lunar habitat felt like an eternity, punctuated by the chilling static of deep space and the hammering of my own heart. Back in the relative safety of the habitat, the sterile white walls offered little comfort. The data we had gathered, the images we had captured, played on a loop in my mind. The geometric precision of the crater, the pulsating energy signature, the sheer scale of the excavation. It all pointed to something far beyond our comprehension. The silence from Earth was deafening. We had sent out emergency transmissions, detailed reports of our findings, desperate pleas for guidance. But the only response was the cold, indifferent hum of the void. The regulators, usually so quick to respond, were silent. It was as if a curtain had fallen, cutting us off from everything we knew. Days bled into nights, each sunrise a stark reminder of our isolation. The lunar landscape, once a symbol of human ambition, now felt like a prison. We rationed our supplies, performed routine checks, the mundane tasks a thin veneer over the gnawing fear that permeated everything. Then, the tremors started. At first, they were barely perceptible, a subtle vibration in the floor of the habitat. We dismissed them as settling, a common occurrence in lunar structures. But they grew stronger, more frequent, shaking the very foundations of our sanctuary. Seismic activity increasing, Elena reported, her voice strained. Epicenter, directly beneath us. We exchanged terrified glances. The implication was clear. Whatever was beneath the lunar surface, it was stirring. And it was directly below us. The habitat, our supposed safe haven, felt increasingly like a coffin. The silence from Earth continued, a chilling testament to our abandonment. We were alone, trapped on a dying moon, with something ancient and unknowable stirring beneath our feet. The constant tremors became a tortuous countdown, a rhythmic reminder of the inevitable. One night, as the lunar dust swirled outside, whipped into a frenzy by the unseen force below, the comms crackled to life. It wasn't Earth. It was a signal, unlike anything we had ever encountered. A complex, rhythmic pulse, emanating from the very heart of the moon. Elena, her face bathed in the eerie glow of the console, frantically tried to decipher the signal. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything we recognized. It was alien. It's communicating, she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. It's addressing us. A chilling wave of dread washed over me. We had sought to understand the secrets of the moon. Now, it seemed, the moon was seeking to understand us. The signal intensified, resonating through the habitat, vibrating in our very bones. It felt like an interrogation, a probing, a dissection of our very being. Then, a voice, synthesized and alien, filled the habitat. It spoke in a language we didn't understand, yet somehow, we understood. The message was simple, terrifying, and utterly final. You have disturbed us. Now, you will be assimilated. The tremors intensified, the habitat groaning under the strain. The floor beneath us began to crack, revealing a gaping chasm filled with an impenetrable darkness. The moon, it seemed, was opening its maw to swallow us whole. And in the face of this cosmic horror, the silence from Earth was the most terrifying sound of all. Part 14. Whispers in the Static. The silence in the lunar module was thicker than the dust coating the sea of tranquility. Armstrong's spectral image flickered on the monitor, his face a rictus of unimaginable horror, the silent scream forever etched in his digitized features. We stared, mesmerized, as the recording looped, his final transmission cutting out just before the deafening roar that wasn't static. It wasn't anything terrestrial. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face pale and drawn, finally broke the silence. We have to assume the worst. Something was down there with them. General Petrov, his eyes like chips of ice, nodded grimly. The question isn't what, but when it'll come for us. The atmosphere and mission control was suffocating, a miasma of fear and uncertainty. The discovery of the vast, unnatural caverns beneath the lunar surface, coupled with Armstrong's last moments, had shattered the illusion of a benign universe. The moon, once a symbol of human ambition and exploration, now loomed over us like a skull in the velvet black of space. Days blurred into weeks. The world held its breath. Every radio telescope on Earth was pointed at the moon, listening for any whisper from the void. We analyzed the fragmented data from Apollo 11's black box, searching for a clue, a pattern, anything that could explain the sudden, inexplicable catastrophe. We found nothing but the growing dread. Then, the whispers began. Not actual whispers, not at first. It started as anomalies in the background radiation, faint distortions that the algorithms initially dismissed as noise. But the anomalies grew stronger, more persistent. They coalesced into a rhythmic pulsing, a sub-audible thrumming that resonated deep within the Earth's own magnetic field. The scientists were baffled. The signal defied any known natural phenomenon. It seemed to be emanating from deep within the moon, from the very heart of the excavated caverns we had glimpsed in the Apollo 11 footage. "It's communicating," Dr. Sharma whispered, her eyes fixed on the undulating wave patterns on the monitor. "Communicating with what?" Petrov demanded, his voice rough with suppressed panic. The answer came sooner than we expected. One by one, the world's deep space probes began to malfunction. The Voyager probes, silent sentinels at the edge of our solar system, went offline. The Mars rovers froze, their cameras staring blankly at the red dust. Even the Hubble telescope, orbiting safely above Earth, began experiencing inexplicable power fluctuations. Then came the dreams. People across the globe reported vivid, unsettling dreams. Dreams of vast, subterranean landscapes bathed in an eerie, phosphorescent light. Dreams of towering, insectoid figures moving with unnerving grace through the lunar caverns. Dreams of a cold, calculating intelligence that regarded humanity with detached curiosity. The dreams were always the same. The same landscapes, the same creatures, the same chilling sense of being observed, dissected, evaluated. I started having them too. Night after night, I found myself drifting through the lunar caverns, the air thick with an unknown, metallic scent. I would see the towering figures in the distance, their multifaceted eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. They never spoke, never moved towards me, yet their presence was overwhelming, a palpable weight on my soul. One night, the dream changed. I was standing on the surface of the moon, the Earth a distant blue marble in the sky. The lunar landscape was not the familiar gray dust and craters, but a sprawling, alien city of impossible angles and shimmering surfaces. The insectoid figures were everywhere, moving with a purpose I couldn't comprehend. Then, one of them turned and looked directly at me. Its eyes, vast and black, seemed to pierce through the veil of the dream, directly into my consciousness. I felt a jolt, a searing pain behind my eyes, and then, a voice. Not a spoken voice, but a thought, a concept injected directly into my mind. "We are the architects, asterisk." The words echoed in the silent chambers of my mind, cold and devoid of emotion. "We have been watching, asterisk." The dream ended. I woke up gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The words of the architects reverberated in my skull, a chilling premonition of what was to come. We had been so preoccupied with the moon, with the evidence of their mining operation, that we had failed to consider the most terrifying possibility of all. They weren't just mining the moon. They were preparing it for something, or someone. And we, the inhabitants of this pale blue dot, were about to find out why. Part 15. The Silent Symphony. The lunar dust clung to my suit like a second skin, a fine, gray shroud mirroring the creeping dread in my heart. We'd pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth revealed beneath the crater floor, the rhythmic thud of our boots the only sound in the oppressive silence. The tunnel system was far more extensive than our initial scans suggested, a network of smooth, obsidian-like corridors branching off in a seemingly random pattern. It was unsettlingly organic, like the inside of some colossal, petrified beast. Martinez, bless his soul, tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes about lunar plumbing and alien subway systems. But his laughter echoed strangely in the confined space, brittle and hollow. Even he couldn't mask the gnawing unease that permeated the air, thick and suffocating as the dust itself. The further we descended, the colder it became. The faint warmth radiating from the Earth, our distant, blue beacon, seemed to diminish with every step. The temperature gauge on my suit dipped alarmingly, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, unrelated to the cold. It was a primal fear, a whisper from the deepest recesses of my being, telling me we were trespassing somewhere we shouldn't be. We'd passed several more of the strange glyphs etched into the walls, each one subtly different, yet undeniably part of a larger, incomprehensible language. Dr. Sharma had been meticulously documenting them, her visor's light casting elongated, dancing shadows that seemed to mock our ignorance. She'd grown increasingly quiet, her initial scientific excitement replaced by a grim determination. I saw it in the set of her jaw, the way she gripped her datapad. She knew, as I did, that we were on the verge of something momentous, something potentially terrifying. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Our headlamps struggled to penetrate the immense darkness, their beams swallowed by the sheer scale of the space. It was as if we'd stumbled into the hollowed-out heart of the moon itself. "My God," Martinez breathed, his voice barely audible. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to map the cavern. As the contours emerged from the gloom, a collective gasp escaped our lips. Towering structures, impossibly smooth and geometrically precise, rose from the cavern floor. They defied description, unlike anything I'd ever seen, terrestrial or otherwise. They pulsed with an internal light, a soft, ethereal glow that shifted and shimmered like captured starlight. It was as though the very fabric of reality was thinner here, allowing a glimpse into some other dimension. In the center of the cavern, dominating the landscape, was a colossal obelisk. It dwarfed the surrounding structures, its surface a tapestry of the same alien glyphs we'd seen in the tunnels, only larger, more intricate, pulsating with the same internal light. It was a monolith of alien design, a testament to a power beyond our comprehension. As we approached the obelisk, a low hum began to resonate through the cavern, vibrating through the soles of our boots and into our very bones. It grew in intensity, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic pulsing of the ethereal light. The glyphs on the obelisk began to glow brighter, their intricate patterns shifting and swirling before our eyes. Dr. Sharma, her face pale and drawn, pointed to a circular platform at the base of the obelisk. It was perfectly smooth, etched with a single, large glyph that seemed to mirror the overall pattern of the obelisk itself. The hum intensified, the air around us crackling with an unseen energy. I think this is some kind of interface," Sharma stammered, her voice strained. "A control panel, maybe?" Before anyone could respond, a beam of light erupted from the top of the obelisk, shooting upwards towards the surface of the moon. It was a blinding white light, pure and intense, cutting through the darkness like a divine blade. The ground trembled beneath our feet, the cavern groaning under some immense pressure. Then, the silence returned. The hum ceased, the light faded, and the glyphs on the obelisk dimmed. The only evidence of what had just occurred was the lingering afterimage burned into our retinas, a ghostly white circle hanging in the darkness. We stood there, frozen, our hearts pounding in our chests. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ragged breaths echoing in our helmets. The moon, our constant companion in the sky, had just spoken. And we had no idea what it had said. Suddenly, Martinez's voice crackled over the comms, choked with a terror I'd never heard before. "Look," he whispered, pointing towards the far side of the cavern. Emerging from the shadows, their forms barely visible in the dim light, were figures. Tall, slender figures, moving with an unnerving grace. They weren't human, they were the architects of this impossible place, the miners of the moon. And they had heard the moon's message. They were coming for us. The lunar dust clung to our suits like spectral dandruff, a constant reminder of where we were, of what we were doing. The silence, broken only by the rasp of our own breathing and the whir of life support systems, pressed down with the weight of 1,000 atmospheres. We had reached the designated crater, Kepler, its rim jagged against the stark black sky. Below, the crater floor stretched out, an expanse of unnatural smoothness punctuated by geometric depressions that looked suspiciously like excavations. This isn't natural, Dr. Sharma whispered, her voice thin and reedy over the comms. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The orbital scans hadn't prepared us for the sheer scale of it. The depressions were massive, perfectly rectangular, and arranged in a grid-like pattern that defied any known geological process. They resembled open-pit mines, stripped bare and abandoned. Readings? I finally managed to croak out. Consistent with the other sites, Sanchez replied, his voice tight with apprehension. High concentrations of rare earth elements, traces of unknown isotopes, and the background radiation, it's climbing. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The rising radiation was a new development, a sinister twist in an already disturbing narrative. We had documented similar elevated radiation levels at the other crater sites, but here, it was significantly higher. It pulsed in the air, an invisible menace that seeped into our bones. We descended cautiously into the largest of the rectangular depressions, the lunar rover crawling along the smooth, almost glassy surface. The silence intensified, broken only by the low hum of the rover's engine. The walls of the excavation rose around us, sheer and smooth, like polished obsidian. It felt like descending into a tomb. Look, whispered Sharma, pointing towards the far wall. Embedded in the smooth surface, barely visible in the weak sunlight, were a series of intricate symbols. They resembled hieroglyphs, but unlike anything we had ever seen. They were sharp, angular, and unsettlingly alien. Cameras rolling, I said, my voice a strained whisper. Get close-ups of those markings. As the rover inched closer, the symbols seemed to writhe and shift in our vision. A trick of the light and shadow, perhaps, but it heightened the unnerving atmosphere. We stopped a few meters from the wall, the symbols looming above us, silent and inscrutable. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine pierced the silence, emanating from deep within the excavation. It was a sound that resonated with something primal, something deeply unsettling. It vibrated in our teeth, in our very bones. What the hell is that? Sanchez hissed, his voice laced with fear. The whine intensified, morphing into a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The rover's lights flickered, and the comms crackled with static. We need to get out of here, I yelled, my voice barely audible above the rising din. I slammed the rover into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died. We were trapped. The growling escalated into a deafening roar, and the ground beneath us began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the smooth surface of the excavation floor. The symbols on the wall pulsed with an eerie, internal light. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the excavation, something moved. It was large, impossibly large, its form obscured by the swirling lunar dust. But even in the dim light, we could make out its shape, a hulking, insectoid silhouette, its limbs segmented and sharp, its head crowned by a cluster of glowing, multifaceted eyes. The creature let out another earth-shattering roar, and the ground beneath us buckled. The rover tipped precariously, throwing us against our restraints. I caught a glimpse of Sharma's face, pale and contorted with terror. Sanchez was muttering a prayer in Spanish, his eyes wide with a primal fear. The creature advanced, its massive form casting a long, menacing shadow. The glowing eyes fixed on us, cold and calculating. They radiated an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly alien. We were trapped, helpless, facing a horror that defied comprehension. The moon, once a symbol of human aspiration, had become our tomb. And the craters, far from being empty scars, were the gaping maws of a nightmare we had only just begun to understand. The radiation wasn't a byproduct of mining, it was a warning. A warning we had tragically ignored. The creature was almost upon us, its segmented limbs clicking and whirring, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something else. Something ancient and indescribably foul. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. This was it, the end. But instead of the crushing blow I expected, I heard another sound, a high-pitched, metallic shriek that echoed through the excavation, drowning out even the creature's roar. I opened my eyes to see a blinding flash of light. Part 17. Lunar Whispers. The dust settled, revealing the cavern's true immensity. It wasn't natural. The walls were too smooth, the angles too precise. Giant, cylindrical shafts plunged into the lunar depths, their edges shimmering with a strange, internal luminescence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rasp of our own breathing within our helmets. A silence that felt heavy, pregnant with unseen things. Readings are off the charts. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the comms, laced with a nervous tremor. Background radiation. Unlike anything I've ever encountered. The rover's headlights cut through the gloom, revealing strange, glyph-like markings on the cavern walls. They weren't random scratches. They formed patterns, complex and intricate, pulsating faintly with the same eerie light as the shafts. I felt a primal unease settle in my stomach. This place felt wrong. Ancient. This isn't mining, I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. This is something else. We proceeded cautiously, the rover crawling along the cavern floor. The air grew colder, the silence deepening. We passed more shafts, each one radiating that unsettling luminescence. They seemed to breathe, their lights subtly expanding and contracting as if responding to some unseen rhythm. Then we saw it. At the cavern's heart, suspended within a vast, circular chamber, was a sphere. Perfect. Enormous. Its surface was a swirling vortex of the same shimmering light, but amplified 1,000-fold. It pulsed with slow, rhythmic breaths, casting shadows that danced across the cavern walls like phantoms. What is that? Anya's voice was barely a breath. We stopped the rover, mesmerized by the sphere's hypnotic presence. The markings on the walls grew brighter, their pulsations synchronizing with the sphere's rhythmic breathing. The air crackled with static, our comms filled with a low, humming drone. Then the sphere began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. The humming grew louder, morphing into a deep, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate within our very bones. The glyphs on the walls blazed with light, the entire cavern bathed in an ethereal glow. And then, the whispers started. Faint at first, barely audible over the humming, they seemed to emanate from the sphere itself. A chorus of voices, speaking in a language I'd never heard, yet somehow understood. They spoke of ages past, of cosmic journeys, of power beyond human comprehension. They spoke of us. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the humming, creating a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. I clutched my head, trying to block out the noise, the whispers, the oppressive presence of the sphere. We need to leave, I yelled, my voice strained, barely audible over the din. Now, but it was too late. The sphere's rotation reached a fever pitch. The light intensified, blinding us. The humming became a deafening roar. And the whispers coalesced into a single, coherent voice, echoing through the cavern, resonating within the deepest recesses of my mind. We have been waiting. Asterisk. The rover's systems went haywire. Lights flickered, alarms blared. The ground beneath us trembled. Anya screamed. I braced myself, expecting the cavern to collapse, the moon to split in two. But nothing happened. The light subsided. The humming faded. The whispers ceased. Silence returned, heavier, more oppressive than before. The sphere, still rotating slowly, pulsed with a gentle, almost soothing light. The rover's systems sputtered back to life. The alarms fell silent. The trembling stopped. We were still alive, but something had changed. The air felt thicker, charged with an unseen energy. The silence was no longer empty, it was filled with a palpable presence. We looked at each other, our faces pale and drawn, our eyes wide with terror. We knew, without speaking, that we were no longer alone in the cavern. Something was with us. Something ancient. Something powerful. And it had been waiting. Slowly, tentatively, I reached out and touched the wall of the rover. The metal felt cold, alien. I looked down at my hand. It was trembling. Then I heard it again. A faint whisper, close to my ear, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. Welcome home, asterisk. Part 18. The Silent Symphony. The lunar dust swirled around my boots, a ghostly halo in the weak earth light. The silence, once a comforting blanket, now felt like a suffocating shroud. It pressed in on me, punctuated only by the rasp of my own breathing echoing in my helmet. Above, the earth hung, a swirling blue and white marble, a stark contrast to the desolate gray landscape that stretched before me. It offered no solace. It was a reminder of everything I might lose. We had established a rudimentary camp inside a relatively small crater, its rim providing a modicum of protection, though from what, we weren't sure. The rover, our lifeline, hunkered down like a wounded beast, its solar panels angled towards the distant sun. Inside, Anya huddled, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the diagnostic readouts. Dmitri, ever stoic, meticulously cleaned his geological hammer, the rhythmic scraping a counterpoint to the oppressive silence. The tremor that had nearly swallowed us the previous day had subsided, but the unease lingered, a low hum beneath the surface of our fear. It had been more than just a geological event. It felt deliberate, like a warning. Anything? I asked Anya, my voice a croak. She shook her head, her dark hair falling across her face. The seismic activity is minimal now. But, there's something else. My heart sank. What? She pointed to a series of jagged lines on the readout. These are unusual, regular, almost rhythmic. Dmitri looked up, his brow furrowed. Rhythmic? Like a heartbeat? Anya hesitated. I don't know. It's too faint to be certain. But it's there. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. A heartbeat, beneath the surface of the moon. The idea was preposterous, yet the evidence, however faint, was undeniable. We spent the rest of the lunar day poring over the data, cross-referencing readings, trying to decipher the strange rhythmic pulses. As the Earth began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the crater floor, the rhythmic pattern intensified. It was now audible, a faint, low thrum that vibrated through the rover's hull. It's coming from below, Dmitri whispered, his eyes wide. We donned our suits and ventured out onto the crater floor, the thrumming now a palpable presence in the air. The silence of the moon had been replaced by a subtle, unsettling vibration. We moved cautiously, our boots crunching on the regolith, the Earth a fading crescent in the sky. We followed the source of the thrumming, our headlamps cutting through the darkness. It led us to a section of the crater wall that appeared undisturbed. But as we approached, we noticed a faint shimmer, a distortion in the air, as if the very fabric of reality was wavering. Dmitri reached out a gloved hand and touched the shimmering surface. His fingers seemed to sink into it, disappearing into the wall as if it were made of water. What is this? He stammered, pulling his hand back. There was no mark, no sign of his hand ever having touched the surface. The thrumming intensified, the shimmering area expanding. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. We stumbled back, our hearts pounding in our chests. Then, the wall began to move. It didn't crack or break. It simply flowed, like a curtain being drawn back, revealing a vast, dark cavity within the moon itself. The cavity pulsed with a faint, ethereal light, and the rhythmic thrumming resonated from deep within. We stood frozen, our breath caught in our throats, staring into the abyss. The air grew thick with a strange, metallic scent. The thrumming became a pulsating roar. And from the depths of the cavity, something began to emerge. It wasn't a single entity. It was a multitude. A swarm of shimmering, crystalline forms, drifting slowly upwards, like bubbles rising in a dark, viscous fluid. They pulsed with the same ethereal light that emanated from the cavity, their movements strangely synchronized. We backed away slowly, our eyes fixed on the approaching swarm. They were unlike anything we had ever seen, their forms shifting and changing, defying easy description. They were beautiful, yet terrifying. Alien, yet strangely familiar. The rhythmic roar intensified, filling the air, vibrating through our bones. The crystalline forms drew closer, their light growing brighter, casting long, distorted shadows across the lunar landscape. The ground trembled violently. The Earth, now a sliver in the sky, seemed to shrink and fade into insignificance. We were trapped, caught between the approaching swarm and the yawning abyss. The silence of the moon had been shattered, replaced by a silent symphony of light and sound, a harbinger of something ancient, something vast, something utterly beyond our comprehension. And in that moment, I understood. The moon's craters weren't evidence of mining. They were breathing holes. Part 19. Whispers in the static. The lunar dust clung to everything, a fine, gray film that tasted of metal and ancient secrets. We hadn't slept in what felt like days. The rhythmic thumping from deep within the crater had become the soundtrack to our waking nightmare, a relentless, sub-audible pulse that vibrated through the very fabric of the lander and resonated in our bones. Maria, bless her soul, was holding up the best of us. She continued to pore over the alien glyphs we'd discovered, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the emergency lamps. The rest of us, however, were fraying at the edges. Jackson's paranoia had escalated to the point where he was convinced the shadows themselves were shifting, stalking us. He'd started talking to the equipment, whispering reassurances to inanimate objects. As for me, the constant static buzzing in our comms was starting to drive me insane. It wasn't just interference, it was patterned, almost melodic. I kept hearing whispers within it, faint, guttural voices just beyond the threshold of comprehension. I mentioned it to Maria, but she just shook her head, attributing it to stress and sleep deprivation. We need to find a way down there, I insisted, gesturing towards the dark abyss of the crater. The rhythmic thumping seemed louder now, almost insistent. We don't have the equipment, David, Maria replied, her voice weary. And even if we did, it's too risky. We don't know what's down there. We know something is down there, Jackson muttered, his eyes darting nervously around the cramped confines of the lander. Something, listening. His words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to dismiss it as his paranoia talking, but the static in my headset intensified, the whispers within it growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coalescing, forming words, phrases. Ascending, preparing, the return? I ripped the headset off, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the static. David? Maria's voice was laced with concern. What is it? I stared at them, my mouth dry. I heard them. In the static. They're coming. Maria exchanged a worried glance with Jackson, who simply nodded grimly, his fear now mirrored in her eyes. We spent the next few hours in a tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic thumping and Jackson's occasional muttered prayers. Maria continued to study the glyphs, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and understanding. I think I've figured it out, she whispered, her voice trembling. These glyphs, they're not a language. They're a warning. A warning? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. They describe a cycle, she continued, tracing her finger over the intricate carvings. A cycle of consumption. These beings, they don't just mine resources. They consume entire worlds. And the moon, it's not just a mining operation. It's a nursery. Her words hung in the air, heavy with dread. A nursery? What did that even mean? Suddenly, the lander shuddered violently, throwing us to the floor. The rhythmic thumping intensified, transforming into a deep, resonant hum that filled the air. Dust rained down from the ceiling as cracks spider-webbed across the viewport, revealing the inky blackness of space beyond. We scrambled to our feet, clinging to the consoles for support as another tremor rocked the lander. Through the cracked viewport, we could see it, a colossal, obsidian black shape rising from the depths of the crater, blotting out the stars. It was unlike anything we had ever seen, a vast, amorphous entity that seemed to defy the laws of physics, shifting and pulsating as it ascended. The static in my headset returned, louder than ever, drowning out the roar of the ascending entity. The whispers were gone, replaced by a single, deafening voice, echoing in my mind, resonating with the very core of my being. We have awakened. The lander groaned under the immense pressure, the metal screaming in protest. We were trapped, helpless, as the entity drew closer, its vast shadow engulfing us, consuming us. The last thing I saw before the viewport shattered, before darkness swallowed us whole, was the surface of the entity, a swirling mass of obsidian and shadow, covered in countless craters, each one a gaping maw, a testament to its insatiable hunger. And then, silence. A silence broken only by the faint, rhythmic thumping, now emanating from deep within my own being. A thumping that echoed the heartbeat of a dying world. A thumping that heralded the return. Part 20. The Silent Scream. The lunar dust clung to our suits like spectral cobwebs, each crunch of our boots a mournful echo in the oppressive silence. We had pressed on, deeper into the crater's abyss, driven by a morbid curiosity that bordered on self-destruction. The initial awe at the scale of the excavation had been replaced by a chilling dread, a primal fear that gnawed at our sanity. The sheer, unnatural angles of the carved rock, the unnerving smoothness of the excavated surfaces, it all spoke of a technology far beyond our comprehension, a power that dwarfed our own like a gnat before a leviathan. Dr. Aris's earlier outburst, his desperate plea for us to turn back, echoed in my helmet. He had claimed to see movement, shadows flickering in the periphery, but we had seen nothing. Yet, the unsettling feeling persisted, a prickling at the back of our necks, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes. His descent into near hysteria had been alarming, but in this alien landscape, even rationality felt like a fragile construct, ready to shatter at the slightest provocation. We reached a point where the crater floor leveled out, opening into a vast, circular expanse. The sheer scale of it stole our breath. Towers of obsidian-like material, taller than any skyscraper on Earth, rose from the ground, arranged in a complex geometric pattern that defied easy understanding. They hummed with a low, resonant frequency, a vibration that we could feel through the soles of our boots, a pulse that seemed to synchronize with our own heartbeats. Captain Eva, her voice strained, broke the silence. This is beyond anything we could have imagined. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The air, or rather the lack of it, felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The silence was deafening, broken only by the static hiss of our comms and the rhythmic thumping of the towers. It was a silence that screamed louder than any roar, a silence that spoke of ancient, unknowable things. We began to explore the circular plain, our boots crunching on the fine, gray dust. The towers seemed to exude an unnatural warmth, and as we approached one, I felt a tingling sensation on my skin, a faint static charge. The surface of the tower was smooth, almost glassy, reflecting our distorted images back at us. Runes, or symbols, were etched into the surface, a language utterly alien and incomprehensible. Suddenly, Aris stopped, his body rigid. He pointed a trembling finger towards one of the towers. "There," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I see it again." We followed his gaze, our hearts pounding in our chests. At first, we saw nothing. Then, a flicker, a ripple in the air, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. The shadow, indistinct and fleeting, darted between the towers, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. "It's there," Aris whispered again, his voice laced with terror. "It's watching us." Eva, her face pale, raised her hand. "We need to leave, now." We turned to retrace our steps, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. As we moved, the humming of the towers intensified, the vibrations growing stronger, resonating deep within our bones. The dust around us began to swirl, lifted by an unseen force, creating ghostly whirlwinds that danced between the obsidian structures. And then, we heard it. A sound that defied description, a sound that resonated not with our ears, but with our very souls. It was a keening wail, a mournful cry that seemed to emanate from the very core of the moon itself. It was a sound of immense sorrow, of unimaginable loss, a sound that spoke of an ancient tragedy playing out on a cosmic scale. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble, the vibrations intensifying, threatening to throw us off balance. The swirling dust coalesced, forming into dark, swirling shapes that darted between the towers, their movements erratic and unsettling. The shadows, no longer fleeting glimpses, solidified, taking on more defined forms. They were humanoid in shape, tall and slender, their limbs impossibly long and thin. Their heads were elongated, their features obscured by the swirling dust, but we could sense their presence, feel their cold, alien gaze upon us. We ran, our boots slipping in the loose dust, the mournful wail echoing in our helmets, drowning out the frantic thumping of our hearts. The shadows pursued us, their movements swift and silent, their presence a suffocating weight on our souls. We were trapped, hunted by something we couldn't comprehend, in a place where the laws of physics seemed to bend and break. The moon, once a symbol of hope and exploration, had become our prison, our tomb. And the silent scream of the cosmos echoed all around us. Part 21. The Silent Scream. The lunar dust clung to my suit, a fine gray shroud mimicking the creeping dread that had settled in my bones. We had found it, the entrance to the mine, or whatever it was. Not a crater, but a perfect, almost surgically precise, circular opening leading down into the moon's silent heart. It gaped before us, a black maw promising answers and oblivion in equal measure. The radio crackled with Houston's hesitant approval to proceed. Their voices, filtered through the miles of space, sounded thin and reedy, ghosts whispering from a dying world. We knew, all of us, that whatever we found down there would change everything. Maria, ever the pragmatist, double-checked our tethers and oxygen levels. Her face, usually animated and bright, was pale beneath the visor of her helmet. Even she, the rock of our mission, seemed shaken by the unnerving stillness of this place. "Ready?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp in my own helmet. She nodded, her movement tight and jerky. We descended. The darkness swallowed us whole, the beam of my headlamp barely penetrating the absolute black. The air grew colder, a sharp, metallic tang replacing the sterile recycled air of our suits. The silence deepened, pressing in on us like the vacuum of space itself. It was a silence that vibrated, a silence pregnant with unspoken horrors. The shaft was smooth, almost glassy. Not natural rock, but something manufactured. The thought sent a fresh wave of icy fear down my spine. We descended for what felt like an eternity, the tether stretching taut above us, our only lifeline to the world above. Finally, the shaft widened into a cavern. Our headlamps, struggling against the immensity of the space, revealed a scene that defied explanation. It was a chamber of colossal proportions, the ceiling lost in the shadows far above. The walls were smooth and black, reflecting the light with an oily sheen. And then there were the structures. Gigantic, geometric shapes that defied any terrestrial architecture. They rose from the floor, towering over us like obsidian monoliths, their surfaces etched with intricate, alien symbols. "My God," Maria breathed, her voice a hushed whisper in my earpiece. I couldn't speak. My mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer alienness of it all. It was a landscape out of a nightmare, a testament to a technology beyond our comprehension. And in the center of the cavern, bathed in the combined light of our headlamps, lay the source of the unsettling silence. It was a machine, or what remained of one. A vast, sprawling construct of twisted metal and shimmering crystals. It was broken, shattered, as if some unimaginable force had ripped through it. But even in its ruined state, it radiated an aura of immense power, a silent hum resonating through the very rock beneath our feet. As we approached, I noticed something else. Scattered around the machine, partially buried in the lunar dust, were bodies. Not human. They were humanoid in shape, but much larger, their skeletal frames encased in what looked like petrified wood. Their limbs were long and thin, ending in delicate, spidery fingers. Their skulls were elongated, with large, empty eye sockets that seemed to stare accusingly at us from across the millennia. What are they?" Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My gaze was fixed on something else. Something that clung to the broken remains of the machine, something that made my blood run cold. It was a hand, human-sized, but not human. The skin was a deep, iridescent blue, stretched taut over bone-thin fingers. One of the fingers was adorned with a ring, a simple band of a dark, unknown metal. And as I stared at it, mesmerized by its alien beauty, the finger twitched. A silent scream tore through my mind. I stumbled back, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Maria grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "John, what is it? What did you see?" I pointed, my hand shaking uncontrollably, at the twitching finger. But as we both stared at it, bathed in the cold light of our headlamps, it stilled. The hand lay motionless, as dead and silent as the rest of the cavern. Had I imagined it? A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by the oxygen-deprived environment and the sheer otherworldly horror of this place? I wanted to believe I had. But deep down, in the icy core of my being, I knew I hadn't. Something was still alive down here. Something ancient, something alien, something, waiting. The silence returned, deeper and more oppressive than before. And in that silence, I could almost hear it, a faint, rhythmic pulsing, coming from the depths of the broken machine. A heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and filled with an ancient, malevolent promise. What if the moon's craters are evidence of alien mining? Part 22. The silence that followed Dr. Aris's chilling revelation was thick enough to choke on. The lunar dust, stirred by our panicked scramble, settled back onto the regolith, a fine gray shroud over everything. Even the rhythmic hum of the habitat's life support seemed to falter, a mechanical gasp mirroring our own stunned breaths. Aris's words hung in the air. The moon wasn't mined, it was being hollowed. And whatever was doing it, it was coming back. We need to leave. Now, Commander Eva's voice was strained, the usual steel replaced by a brittle edge of fear. We can't, I stammered, my gaze fixed on the deepening shadow within the Copernicus crater, visible even through the habitat's reinforced viewing port. The Odysseus is still hours from launch readiness. Then we prepare. Every second counts, Eva snapped, her eyes darting from the crater to the monitors displaying the readings from the seismic sensors. The needles were dancing wildly, registering tremors far beyond anything explained by lunar settling or meteor impacts. The tremors intensified, a low rumble that vibrated through the habitat floor, resonating in our bones. The lights flickered ominously, and a high-pitched whine emanated from the life support system, straining against the increasing pressure. Seismic activity escalating exponentially, Dr. Chen announced, his voice tight with barely suppressed terror. Magnitude, off the charts. It's like the moon itself is groaning. A chilling thought pierced my mind. If the moon was being hollowed, what happened when there was nothing left to hollow? The answer, it seemed, was coming swiftly. A tremor, more violent than any before, sent us sprawling. Cracks spider-webbed across the viewing port, distorting the image of the deepening shadow within Copernicus. A terrifying, guttural roar echoed from the lunar surface, a sound that defied any earthly comparison, a sound that scraped against the primal fear buried within our very DNA. Structural integrity compromised, Chen yelled, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and the grinding of metal against metal. Eva clawed her way to her feet. Emergency protocols. Everyone to the escape pods. Now, panic clawed at me. The escape pods, a last resort, barely tested, designed for short-range lunar hops, not interstellar escape. But they were our only chance. We stumbled through the corridors, the habitat groaning and shuddering around us, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. The roar from outside intensified, closer now, accompanied by a rhythmic pounding, like a gargantuan heart beating against the lunar crust. We reached the escape pod bay, the metal doors buckled and groaning under the immense pressure. Eva wrestled the first pod open, shoving Chen and another crew member inside. Go, she yelled, slamming the hatch closed. I'll get the next one ready. I watched the pod detach, a tiny speck of hope against the backdrop of the dying moon, its thrusters firing a pathetically weak defiance against the inevitable. Suddenly, the habitat lurched violently, throwing me against the wall. The remaining escape pods, ripped from their moorings, tumbled across the bay, mangled and useless. Eva was sprawled on the floor, her face pale, a dark stain spreading across her uniform. Eva, I scrambled to her side. She coughed, a bloody froth bubbling on her lips. Go, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the viewing port, now a shattered kaleidoscope of fractured glass. Tell them what happened here. Through the jagged cracks, I saw it. The shadow in Copernicus had vanished. In its place, a colossal, chitinous limb, segmented and glistening, rose from the depths of the crater, dwarfing the surrounding lunar landscape. The limb moved with a terrifying grace, its tip ending in a claw the size of a small mountain. Another limb followed, then another, each one pushing aside the lunar dust like it was nothing. The moon, it wasn't being hollowed. It was hatching, and whatever was emerging was beyond our comprehension, beyond our nightmares. A deafening crack echoed through the ruined habitat as the final supports gave way. The roof began to collapse, burying Eva beneath tons of twisted metal. I closed my eyes, the guttural roar of the emerging creature ringing in my ears. A death knell for our moon, and perhaps, for our world. I knew then that there would be no escape. There would be no rescue. There would be no one to tell. The last thing I saw, before the darkness consumed me, was the monstrous form rising against the backdrop of the earth. Its silhouette a promise of an apocalypse we could no longer prevent. A harvest moon, indeed. But we were not the reapers. We were the crop. Part 23. Lunar Whispers. The regolith crunched under my boots, a sound strangely amplified in the oppressive silence. Above, earth hung like a fractured marble, its vibrant blues and greens a cruel mockery of the desolate gray that surrounded me. The others were ahead, their figures ghostly in the harsh sunlight, moving with a grim determination towards the newly uncovered chasm. I could feel the pull of it too, a morbid curiosity drawing me closer to the unknown. The chasm wasn't a natural formation. It was a wound, a gaping, geometrically precise incision in the lunar surface. Its edges were sharp, unweathered, as if some colossal blade had sliced through the moon's crust only moments ago. Looking down into the abyss, I saw only impenetrable darkness. The lights on our suits barely penetrated the inky void. It was as if the light itself was being swallowed, absorbed by something ancient and hungry. Anything? Sanchez's voice crackled in my helmet. The tremor in it was palpable. Nothing, I replied, my own voice sounding thin and distant. It's too deep. Sensors are going haywire. We'd lowered a probe equipped with cameras and sensors, but after descending a few hundred meters, the signal had been lost. Whatever lay in the depths of that chasm, it was disrupting our technology, warping the very fabric of reality around it. A low, humming sound began to emanate from the chasm, barely audible at first, but growing steadily in intensity. It was a deep, resonating thrum, like the heartbeat of some colossal beast. The ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice rising in panic. Now, but it was too late. The humming intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, throwing us to our knees. From the depths of the chasm, a blinding light erupted, bathing the lunar landscape in an unearthly glow. Silhouetted against the light, a form began to rise. It was vast, impossibly large, its shape shifting and undulating in the blinding glare. I couldn't make out any distinct features, only a sense of immense scale and unimaginable power. It was like something out of a nightmare, a being from a realm beyond human comprehension. The others were screaming, their cries distorted by the static in our comms. I wanted to scream too, but terror had choked my voice. I could only stare in horrified fascination as the colossal entity continued to ascend, its presence filling the lunar sky. Then, the humming stopped. The blinding light faded, replaced by an eerie, pulsating luminescence that emanated from the being itself. As my eyes adjusted, I began to see. It wasn't a single entity, but a multitude of them, interwoven and interconnected like the roots of some gigantic tree. They were made of a material I couldn't identify, something that shimmered and shifted like liquid metal, yet possessed the strength and rigidity of diamond. Tendrils of this material reached out from the central mass, probing and exploring the lunar surface. One of these tendrils snaked towards us. It moved with unnatural speed and precision, its tip splitting into a multitude of smaller filaments that danced in the air like curious serpents. One of these filaments brushed against my helmet, and a jolt of pure energy surged through my body. I saw visions, fleeting glimpses of alien landscapes, of strange, bioluminescent cities, of vast, subterranean caverns filled with unimaginable technology. Then, the filament retracted. The colossal being, our collective, seemed to lose interest in us. It turned its attention back to the chasm, slowly descending back into the darkness. As it sank back into the abyss, the pulsating luminescence faded, and the lunar landscape was once again plunged into shadow. We were left there, kneeling in the dust, our bodies trembling, our minds reeling from the experience. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than before, broken only by the ragged breaths in our helmets. We had seen the truth, the horrifying reality of what lay beneath the moon's surface. And it was a truth that threatened to shatter our sanity. The moon wasn't simply being mined. It was being consumed. These entities were not miners. They were something far more sinister, something that had been slumbering beneath the lunar surface for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, they were stirring. I looked back at Earth, hanging like a fragile ornament in the black void. A wave of despair washed over me. We had sought answers on the moon, but we had found only a greater, more terrifying mystery. And now, we were trapped between a dying Earth and an awakening nightmare. The moon whispered, and we heard. The lunar dust crunched under my boots, a sound both alien and intimately familiar now. The Earth hung, a vibrant blue marble in the black sky, a stark reminder of what we were losing. The massive, skeletal mining structure loomed above, its shadow stretching across the desolate landscape like the skeletal fingers of a grasping hand. The low hum, the one that resonated deep in my bones, hadn't ceased since we discovered the truth. It was the sound of the moon being hollowed out, the sound of our impending doom. We, the remaining 4 members of the Artemis 12 mission, were ghosts, haunting a world already lost. Captain Eva Rostova, her face etched with grim determination, consulted the flickering display of her wrist-mounted computer. Dr. Lin Wei, our geologist, stared out at the alien structure with a mixture of awe and terror. And Sanchez, our engineer, just stared at his boots, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He hadn't spoken a coherent sentence since we'd found the desiccated remains of the advance team, their suits intact but their insides gone. "We've analyzed the energy signature," Eva said, her voice flat. "It's unlike anything we've ever encountered. Highly focused, incredibly powerful. It's what they're using to process the lunar core." The thought of the moon's core being systematically devoured, turned into fuel or some unknown substance by these unseen entities, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. It wasn't just a scientific curiosity anymore. It was a visceral threat, a cosmic horror unfolding above us. "We need to send the warning," Lynn whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum. Eva shook her head. "The comms are still down. They've jammed every frequency. They knew we were coming. Then what do we do?" Sanchez finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "We're just waiting to join the others." A shiver ran down my spine. We had found the advance team in one of the smaller craters, their suits perfectly preserved, looking almost peaceful. But inside, there was nothing left but dust. Fine, gray dust, like the lunar regolith, but with a faint, metallic sheen. It was as if they had been consumed from within. "We fight," Eva said, her voice regaining some of its steel. "We find a way to get a message through. We owe it to them. We owe it to Earth." But how? We were stranded, outgunned, outmatched by a technology so far beyond our comprehension it felt almost like magic. The alien structure pulsed with a sickly green light, a rhythmic heartbeat of impending doom. "I might have an idea," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The old Chinese lunar rover, the U-22. It's still operational, and its communication systems are independent of the Artemis network. It might have enough power to send a burst transmission." Eva looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "It's a long shot. The rover's on the far side of the crater." "It's our only shot," I insisted. The journey across the crater was agonizingly slow. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking horror, every rock formation an alien sentinel. The humming intensified, vibrating through the ground, through our suits, through our very bones. We moved like specters in a dying world, the ghosts of a future that would never be. We finally reached the U-22, its solar panels gleaming faintly in the Earthlight. It looked pathetically small against the backdrop of the alien structure, a fragile piece of human ingenuity against the cold, indifferent vastness of space. Sanchez and I worked frantically, bypassing the rover's safety protocols, rerouting power to the communication array. Lynn kept watch, scanning the horizon with a handheld scanner, her face pale. "They know we're here," she said, her voice strained. "They're coming." I looked up. A section of the alien structure had opened, and a dark shape was emerging. It wasn't a ship, not in the traditional sense. It was more like a swarm. A swirling mass of black particles, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid form, shimmering and shifting in the lunar dust. It moved with an unnatural grace, its form fluid and unsettling. "Hurry," Eva yelled. Sanchez slammed his fist against the control panel. Transmission initiated. A faint signal, a desperate cry for help, arced out from the U-22, aimed towards Earth. It was a whisper against the cosmic roar, a tiny spark of defiance in the face of overwhelming darkness. The swarm descended. It enveloped the rover, smothering it in a cloud of black particles. The signal died. We were next. The hum intensified, drowning out all other sounds. The black swarm advanced, its form shifting and swirling, reaching out with unseen tendrils of dread. The Earth hung above, beautiful and distant, oblivious to the horrors unfolding on its silent guardian. And as the swarm engulfed us, I realized the terrible truth. The moon wasn't being mined. It was being prepared, a staging ground, a stepping stone, for the invasion of Earth. This was our last stand. And we were going to lose. The lunar dust, stained in unnatural, ferrous red, clung to my boots as I stumbled back towards the lander. The silence, once comforting in its vastness, now pressed in, suffocating me with the weight of what I'd seen. The city, if it could even be called that, was a skeletal framework of colossal, obsidian-like structures, piercing the lunar surface like the ribs of a decaying god. And within its skeletal embrace, something moved. I hadn't seen them clearly, not through the swirling dust and the shimmering heat haze rising from the freshly exposed earth. But the glimpses, the fleeting impressions, were burned onto my retinas. Giant, insectal shapes, moving with a terrifying, unnatural fluidity. Things that shouldn't exist, not here, not anywhere. My breath caught in my throat. The radio crackled to life, Myra's voice thin and strained. "Dr. Finch? Report. What did you find?" I wanted to scream, to pour out the horrific truth, to warn her, to warn everyone. But the words caught in my throat, choked by the unimaginable enormity of it all. "Nothing," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. It's nothing. Lies. All lies." I clambered back into the lander, the hatch hissing shut behind me, sealing me into the sterile, metallic cocoon. Myra's face, projected onto the comm screen, was etched with worry. "You're pale, Finch. What's wrong?" I forced a weak smile. "Just the low gravity. Getting to me." The engines roared to life, the lander shuddering as we lifted off the lunar surface. I watched as the city receded below, the insectal shapes growing smaller, blurring into the dust. But even as the earth swelled in the viewport, a sense of dread, cold and sharp, pierced my gut. They were still there, waiting. Back on Earth, the world continued its oblivious spin. The debriefings were a blur, my carefully constructed lies flowing smoothly, masking the chilling truth. I spoke of geological anomalies, of unusual rock formations, of nothing that would betray the horrifying discovery I had made. They lauded me as a hero, the first man to walk on the untouched far side of the moon. The nightmares began almost immediately. Visions of the obsidian city, of the shifting, chitinous forms, haunted my sleep. The silence of space, once a source of awe, now echoed with the unspoken whispers of something ancient and malevolent. I started seeing them in the shadows, fleeting glimpses in the periphery of my vision, just at the edge of perception. Were they here? Had they followed me? I tried to warn people, to tell them what I had seen. But my words were met with skepticism, with pity. I was, after all, the astronaut who had spent too long in the void, the hero whose mind had cracked under the pressure. They patted my shoulder, offered me sedatives, and gently steered me towards the comforting embrace of therapy. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The world moved on, unaware of the monstrous truth lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. I, however, was trapped, consumed by the knowledge I carried. The moon hung heavy in the night sky, a constant, accusing presence. It wasn't just a celestial body anymore, it was a watchful eye, a silent testament to the horrors that awaited us. Then came the tremors. Subtle at first, barely perceptible vibrations in the earth. But they grew stronger, more frequent. Scientists dismissed them as tectonic shifts, as natural occurrences. But I knew better. I felt it in the marrow of my bones, a primal fear that resonated with the ancient dread within me. One night, the tremors intensified, the ground shaking violently. I stumbled outside, the sky a swirling canvas of crimson and black. The moon, impossibly large, hung low in the sky, its surface pulsing with an unnatural light. The craters, once mere indentations, now seemed like gaping wounds, oozing a sickly, luminescent fluid. And then, they came. Not in ships, not in sleek, metallic craft, but in monstrous, writhing forms that defied description. They poured from the moon, spilling onto the earth like a biblical plague. The insectal shapes I had glimpsed on the lunar surface were mere drones, scouts for the true horrors that now descended upon us. The world erupted in chaos. Screams filled the night, punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone and the wet, tearing sounds of flesh. I watched, paralyzed by terror, as the creatures swept through the streets, their massive, chitinous limbs crushing everything in their path. My warnings, once dismissed as madness, now echoed in the deafening silence that followed the initial carnage. But it was too late. The earth, once our sanctuary, was now their hunting ground. The moon, once a symbol of hope and wonder, was now a tombstone in the sky, marking the end of our reign. And I, the lone witness to their coming, was left to face the horrifying dawn of a new era, an era ruled by the creatures from the craters, the silent miners of the moon. The silence of space, once so vast and comforting, was now filled with the chilling chorus of their victory. And in that silence, I heard the final, devastating truth: we were never alone. We were simply livestock.